We stand alone, or so we believe. For millennia, humanity, Homo sapiens, has gazed out at the world with the unshakable conviction of our uniqueness. We have built cities that scrape the heavens, composed symphonies that stirred the soul, and sent probes beyond the confines of our solar system. Our story, as we tell it, is one of singular triumph, a linear march from a brutish past to a glorious, enlightened present. We are the inheritors of the earth, the masters of all we survey. But this story, this comforting narrative of solitary ascent, is incomplete. It is a tale told by the victor, echoing down the ages, while the voices of the vanquished have been silenced by the relentless passage of time. Yet, those voices are not entirely gone. They speak to us not in words, but in the language of stone and bone. They whisper from the deep, frozen strata of the earth, from the dark, cool recesses of ancient caves. For much of our history, these whispers were misunderstood, misinterpreted as the remains of deformed humans or mythical beasts. It was only in the middle of the 19th century, in a quiet valley in Germany, that a discovery was made that would begin to crack the foundation of our solitary existence. The place was the Neanderthal Valley, and the bones found there were unlike any seen before. A heavy, robust skull with a pronounced brow ridge, and limbs that spoke of a life of immense physical strength. This was the first official encounter with another kind of human, a species that would come to be known as Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals. Initially, they were cast as the ultimate primitive brutes, stooped, stupid, hairy creatures, grunting their way through a short, brutal existence, destined for extinction because they were inferior in every way to our own brilliant ancestors. They were the foil to our success, the failed experiment in humanity that highlighted our own superiority. This caricature, born of Victorian-era prejudices and a fundamental misunderstanding of the evidence, has proven to be incredibly persistent. But science has a way of challenging our deepest held assumptions. Over the past few decades, a revolution has been quietly unfolding in the fields of paleoanthropology and genetics. New technologies, particularly the ability to extract and sequence ancient DNA, have allowed us to read the genetic code of these long-lost people. We are no longer just staring at their skeletons. We are beginning to look into their eyes, to understand their lives, their strengths, their struggles, and their ultimate fate. And what we are discovering is shattering the simplistic myth of the brutish Neanderthal. The dark truth that is emerging is far more complex, far more intimate, and in many ways, far more troubling than the old story of simple replacement. It is a truth that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about our own nature. It reveals a world, not of one triumphant human species, but of many. A vibrant tapestry of different peoples who shared the earth for thousands of years. It is a story of encounters in the frozen landscapes of Ice Age Europe, of coexistence, of competition, and of connection. The evidence now irrefutably shows that we, Homo sapiens, did not simply outcompete the Neanderthals into oblivion. We met them, we lived alongside them, and, in moments that have left an indelible mark on our very being, we loved them. This narrative is the story of that revelation. It is a journey back into a lost chapter of our own family history. A chapter written in the DNA of nearly every person of non-African descent alive today. It is a tale of a resilient, intelligent, and deeply human species who faced challenges we can scarcely imagine, who carved out an existence in a harsh and unforgiving world, and whose legacy is not one of failure, but of a profound and lasting merger. The Neanderthals are not our dim-witted cousins. They are a part of us, and to understand them is to understand a hidden, and perhaps fundamental, part of ourselves. This is the dark truth, not because it is evil, but because it has been hidden in the shadows of prehistory, waiting for the light of science to bring it into view. Our story is not one of solitude. It is, and always has been, a story of collision, of contact, and of a ghost that walks within us all. To understand the Neanderthals, we must first erase the world we know. We must strip away the green, temperate landscapes, the sprawling cities, the very notion of a stable climate. We must journey back in time nearly 400,000 years, to a planet gripped by the Pleistocene epoch, often called the Great Ice Age. This was not a time of perpetual winter, but a period of dramatic climatic swings. For tens of thousands of years, vast ice sheets, sometimes over a mile thick, would advance from the poles. Swallowing continents under a crushing weight of white. Sea levels would plummet, exposing land bridges that connected islands to mainlands and continents to one another. Then, Just as relentlessly, the ice would retreat, giving way to brief, warmer intervals before the cold inevitably returned. This was the stage upon which the Neanderthal drama would unfold, a world of extremes, a world of flux. It was in this volatile world, in the crucible of Eurasia, that the Neanderthals evolved. Their story begins not with a sudden appearance, but as a gradual divergence from a common ancestor they shared with our own Homo sapiens lineage. While our direct ancestors were evolving in Africa, a population of early humans, often referred to as Homo heidelbergensis, had already migrated out into Europe and Western Asia. Isolated in this new, challenging environment, subjected to cycles of glacial and interglacial periods, these populations began to change. Generation by generation, over millennia, natural selection sculpted a human form exquisitely adapted to the cold, demanding landscape of Ice Age Europe. This was the genesis of Homo neanderthals. Their physicality was their most immediate and defining characteristic, a direct response to the world they inhabited. They were, on average, shorter and far more robust than modern humans. Their bodies were stocky and barrel-chested, a build that minimized surface area and conserved heat, a principle known as Bergmann's rule. Their limbs were shorter and thicker, again an adaptation to reduce heat loss, but it is in the skull where their distinctiveness is most pronounced. The face was projected forward, dominated by a large, broad nose. For decades, this was interpreted as a primitive aplic feature. We now understand it was a sophisticated piece of biological engineering. The large nasal passages would have served to warm and humidify the cold, dry air they breathed, protecting their lungs and brain. Behind the face was a brain case that was, on average, just as large as our own, if not slightly larger, but its shape was different, longer and lower, flatter on top, bulging at the back and sides, housing a brain that was every bit as complex as the one we carry. Their strength was phenomenal. Analysis of their bone structure reveals massive muscle attachments, and their skeletons show a lifetime of intense physical stress. A Neanderthal man or woman would have possessed strength surpassing that of even the most powerful modern human athlete. This was not merely for show. It was a necessity. Their survival depended on close-quarters hunting. There were no long-range weapons like bows and arrows. Their primary technology was the thrusting spear. To feed their communities, they had to get within arm's reach of massive, dangerous prey: woolly mammoths, straight-tusked elephants, woolly rhinoceroses, and giant deer. The archaeological record is littered with Neanderthal skeletons bearing horrific injuries: broken ribs, fractured skulls, and massive trauma consistent with being trampled or gored. These were not the injuries of clumsy brutes. They were the occupational hazards of a supremely capable and courageous hunter. Their world was a vast open landscape, what is known as the Mammoth Steppe. It was not a barren wasteland, but a rich, productive grassland that stretched from the Atlantic coast of Europe all the way to Alaska. It supported an incredible megafauna, herds of bison, horses, and reindeer, alongside the iconic mammoths and rhinos. This was the Neanderthals' larder. They were not cave dwellers by choice, but by necessity, using rock shelters and the mouths of caves as seasonal base camps, places of refuge from the punishing elements. They were highly mobile, following the migratory patterns of the animals they depended on. For hundreds of thousands of years, the Neanderthals were the undisputed masters of this Eurasian world. They developed a sophisticated stone tool technology known as the Mousterian, after the site of Le Moustier in France. Their toolkit was primarily based on expertly crafted flake tools, created by carefully shaping a core of stone and then striking off sharp, versatile flakes that could be used for butchery, scraping hides, and working wood. They mastered the use of fire, providing warmth, protection from predators, and a means to cook food. There is compelling evidence that they constructed simple shelters from mammoth bones and animal skins when caves were unavailable. They were not merely surviving. They were thriving in an environment that would be lethally inhospitable to modern humans unprepared for its rigors. This was their world, a world they knew intimately for over 300,000 years. They had endured multiple glacial cycles, adapting their strategies and their technologies to the changing climate. They had a culture, a technology, and a way of life that was perfectly suited to the challenges they faced. They were, by any measure, a successful and resilient human species. And then, around 60,000 years ago, a new presence began to appear on the edges of their domain. From the south, from Africa, came a different kind of human, a species with a leaner build, a higher, rounder skull, and a new, more versatile toolkit. Homo sapiens had arrived. The world that the Neanderthals had known for millennia was about to change forever, and the stage was set for one of the most profound encounters in the history of our planet. The arrival of Homo sapiens into the Neanderthal world was not an invasion in the classical sense, not a coordinated army sweeping across continents. It was a slow, inexorable trickle, a migration of small, highly adaptable bands of hunter-gatherers, moving along coastlines and river valleys, perhaps following the herds they depended upon. This wave of modern humans, often referred to as the African Exodus, began around 70,000 to 60,000 years ago, and their journey would eventually lead them to populate every corner of the globe. But their first major encounter with another intelligent, technologically sophisticated human species occurred in the lands long held by the Neanderthals, the Middle East, and later Europe. What were these newcomers like? In many ways, they were physically less imposing than the Neanderthals. They were taller, more gracile, built for endurance running in the open savannas of Africa, rather than for explosive power and close-quarters combat. Their technology, however, represented a significant leap. The toolkit of these early modern humans, known as the Upper Paleolithic industry, was characterized by a stunning diversity and efficiency. They crafted long, slender blades from stone cores, getting far more cutting edge from a single piece of raw material than the Neanderthals' Mousterian technology could produce. They used bone, antler, and ivory to create specialized tools, awls, needles, spear points materials the Neanderthals used only rarely. Most significantly, they developed projectile technology, such as spear throwers atlatls, which allowed them to hunt from a safer distance. This was a different survival strategy, less about brute force and more about tactical planning, innovation, and risk mitigation. The archaeological record in the Levant, a crucial corridor between Africa and Eurasia, shows a fascinating and complex pattern of overlap. At certain sites, we find evidence of Neanderthals and modern humans occupying the same region, though not necessarily the same exact caves, at different times. It suggests a world where these two human species were aware of each other's presence, perhaps interacting sporadically for thousands of years before any significant, sustained contact occurred. It was a long, slow dance on the edges of each other's territories, a prelude to a much deeper engagement. Then, around 45,000 years ago, the dance changed. Modern human populations began to push deeper into the heart of Europe, the Neanderthals' ancestral homeland. The climate was volatile, shifting between cold and milder periods, putting pressure on all human populations. The archaeological signature of this expansion is a culture known as the Oriniation, marked by even more sophisticated toolkits and, for the first time, an explosion of unambiguous symbolic expression. This is the period when we find the first cave paintings, the intricate carvings of animals and mythical figures, the personal adornments like beads and pendants made from shell, tooth, and ivory. This symbolic explosion suggests a cognitive capacity for abstract thought, complex language, and social identity that may have been more developed or simply expressed differently than in Neanderthal societies. The traditional narrative has been that this superior technology and cognitive flexibility allowed Homo sapiens to rapidly outcompete the stagnant Neanderthals. The reality, as always, is more nuanced. The Neanderthals were not static. In their final millennia, we see evidence of a culture known as the Châtelperronian, primarily in France and northern Spain. Intriguingly, the Châtelperronian shows a blend of classic Neanderthal Mousterian techniques with innovations that look remarkably similar to those of the incoming modern humans. Oriniation culture. Neanderthals at these sites were creating more refined tools and, most provocatively, they were crafting their own beads and ornaments. For over a century, a fierce debate has raged. Was this a case of Neanderthals independently innovating, or were they morphon ihag, the new successful behaviors they observed in their Homo sapiens neighbors? The latter possibility is profound. It suggests that Neanderthals were capable of complex cultural learning, of recognizing a good idea and adopting it. It suggests a level of cognitive sophistication that demolishes the old brute stereotype. It also suggests direct, if perhaps tense, contact. This period of overlap, which lasted for several thousand years, was the crucible in which the fates of the two species were forged. It was not an immediate takeover. The evidence points to a patchwork of coexistence, competition, and possibly conflict. Both species were hunting the same animals, needing the same resources: water, shelter, high-quality stone for tools. In a world undergoing climatic stress, this competition would have been intense. The technological advantages of Homo sapiens, particularly their projectile weapons, may have given them an edge in hunting efficiency and safety. Their larger social networks, inferred from the long-distance trade of materials, may have provided a buffer against local resource shortages. But the Neanderthals were not passive victims. They were a people deeply knowledgeable about their land, incredibly resilient, and physically powerful. For generations, they held their own against the newcomers. But slowly, inexorably, the balance began to shift. The Neanderthal populations, always small and scattered, began to contract. Their signature Mousterian and Chattelperonian tools disappear from the archaeological record, layer by layer, replaced by the orination of Homo sapiens. The long reign of the Neanderthals in Europe was coming to an end. The final act of their story was about to begin, an act that would leave a secret legacy hidden within us all. The last known evidence of Neanderthals comes from sites in southern Iberia, around Gibraltar, dating to roughly 40,000 years ago. After that, the material culture they left behind vanishes. For a long time, the prevailing theory was simple: extinction by replacement. Homo sapiens, being superior in intellect, technology, and social organization, outcompeted the Neanderthals for resources, leading to their gradual decline and eventual disappearance. They were driven to the edges of the continent and then into oblivion. It was a clean, clinical, and ultimately comforting explanation for us, the victors. It reinforced our specialness. But then, science delivered a revelation that shattered this simple story, a discovery that forced a complete rewriting of human history. The breakthrough came from the unlikeliest of sources, not from a new archaeological dig, but from a laboratory. In 2010, after years of painstaking effort, an international team of scientists, led by Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, published the first draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome. The goal was to understand our genetic differences, to pinpoint the unique changes that made us human. But the results contained a bombshell. When they compared the Neanderthal genome to the genomes of modern people from around the world, they made a startling discovery. The DNA of modern humans from Europe, Asia, and the Americas, in other words, all populations whose ancestors had migrated out of Africa, shared between 1% and 4% of their DNA with the Neanderthals. The DNA of modern humans from sub-Saharan Africa, whose ancestors had not undertaken this migration, did not. There was only one possible explanation for this pattern: interbreeding. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals had not simply coexisted as separate species. They had met, they had interacted, and on multiple occasions, they had produced fertile offspring. These hybrid children were raised within Homo sapiens communities, and they, in turn, had children of their own, introducing Neanderthal DNA into the modern human gene pool. This was not a minor, anomalous event. The genetic data suggests that interbreeding occurred multiple times, in different locations, most likely in the Middle East, as the first waves of modern humans were entering Neanderthal territory. This single finding transformed our understanding of the past. The encounter was not solely one of competition and conflict. It was also one of intimacy and connection. This is the true dark truth, not a dark secret of violence, but a truth that had been hidden in the shadows of our own cells. The Neanderthals did not go entirely extinct. They were absorbed. A part of them lives on in billions of people today. This realization changes the nature of their disappearance from a tragedy of replacement to a complex story of merger. The population of incoming Homo sapiens was almost certainly larger. The small, scattered bands of Neanderthals, after millennia of hardship and then competition, found themselves being genetically swamped by the newcomers. Their distinct physical form and material culture faded away, but their genetic legacy endured, woven into the fabric of our own species. But what does this Neanderthal DNA do? Is it just inert junk, a fossilized relic of a long-past encounter? Far from it. Scientists are now beginning to understand the functional significance of these ancient genes. This Neanderthal inheritance is a double-edged sword, a gift with a cost. On one hand, It appears that the Neanderthals gave us genes that were immediately beneficial as we moved into new and challenging environments. They had been adapted to the colder climates, pathogens, and diets of Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years. By interbreeding with them, we modern humans effectively acquired locally adapted genes through a process called adaptive introgression. Studies have shown that Neanderthal DNA in modern humans is associated with traits related to immune system function, helping our ancestors fight off novel diseases they encountered outside of Africa. Other Neanderthal genes are linked to skin pigmentation and hair texture, possibly adaptations to varying levels of sunlight. They gave us a biological toolkit for survival in a new world. On the other hand, this genetic legacy came with a burden. The same Neanderthal DNA is also linked to a higher predisposition to certain modern diseases, including autoimmune disorders like lupus and Crohn's disease, as well as an increased risk for depression, type 2 diabetes, and nicotine addiction. It seems that genes, which may have been advantageous in the context of a Paleolithic lifestyle, perhaps by promoting a more aggressive inflammatory response to pathogens, can have maladaptive consequences in our modern world. Furthermore, the distribution of Neanderthal DNA in our genomes is not random. There are large deserts where it is completely absent, particularly in regions associated with male fertility and the development of sperm. This suggests that the hybrid offspring, particularly males, may have had reduced fertility, creating a biological barrier that ultimately limited the amount of Neanderthal DNA that could be passed on. The intimacy had its limits, defined by the deep biological divergence of the two species. The extinction of the Neanderthals as a distinct people was therefore not a single-event catastrophe, but a gradual process of assimilation and demographic absorption. They were not wiped out. They were woven in. Their story is not one of failure, but of a contribution that has shaped the biology of a significant portion of humanity. They are not a separate branch on the human family tree that was neatly pruned. Their branch merged with ours. We are the product of that ancient union. The discovery of interbreeding forced a radical revaluation of the Neanderthal body. But what of their mind? The old caricature of the grunting, stupid brute is scientifically untenable in light of the genetic evidence. You do not successfully interbreed with a species that lacks complex language, social structure, and symbolic thought. The question is no longer if they were intelligent, but how their intelligence was similar to or different from our own. Piecing together the cognitive world of the Neanderthals is one of the greatest challenges in paleoanthropology. But the evidence, when viewed without prejudice, paints a picture of a deeply thoughtful and emotional people. Let us consider the evidence for their cultural and symbolic life. We have long known that they buried their dead. At sites like La Chapelle Saints in France and Shanada Cave in Iraq, we find clear evidence of intentional burial. At Shanada, one individual, known as Shanada 4, was found surrounded by clumps of pollen from brightly colored medicinal flowers. This was initially interpreted as a flower burial, a deliberate funerary rite suggesting belief in an afterlife, or, at the very least, deep respect for the deceased. While later studies have suggested rodents may have brought the flowers into the grave, the fact of the burial itself remains significant. It implies a concept of mortality that goes beyond the merely practical. It suggests empathy, grief, and perhaps a ritualistic practice. They were also capable of using pigments, like red ochre, which has been found at several Neanderthal sites. Ochre has no practical functional use for tool-making or butchery. Its use is almost certainly symbolic, perhaps for body painting or ritual decoration. In Spain, archaeologists found a collection of perforated and painted marine shells that date to a time when only Neanderthals were present in the region. These were likely used as pendants or beads, personal adornments that speak to a sense of identity, aesthetics, and social signaling. Then there is the enigmatic and profound example of cave art. For decades, the stunning paintings in European caves like Chauvet and Lascaux were attributed solely to Homo sapiens. But recent advances in dating techniques have delivered another shock. In caves across Spain, such as La Pasiga, Maltravieso and Ardell's red hand stencils and geometric shapes have been dated to over 64,000 years ago, at time when Homo sapiens had not yet arrived in Europe. This art is unequivocally Neanderthal. It represents a capacity for symbolic thought, for marking a place as significant, for expressing something that we can no longer decipher, but must recognize as a spark of consciousness akin to our own. They were not just painting animals, they were painting their hands. leaving an indelible "I was here" etched in pigment on stone. Their technological adaptability also speaks volumes. The development of the chattel-Peronian industry shows they were capable of innovation and cultural change. Evidence from the site of Abri-du-Maras in France suggests they were making cordage-twisting plant fibers to create string or rope around 90,000 years ago, a technology that requires abstract thought and complex planning. They were using fire in sophisticated ways, and there is evidence from the site of Brunequel in France, where Neanderthals built complex circular structures from broken stalagmites deep inside a cave over 176,000 years ago, that they were capable of venturing into the deep dark underworld for purposes that were almost certainly ritualistic. All of this evidence coalesces into a portrait of a people who were not cognitive inferiors. Their minds were different, perhaps focused more on the immediate, tangible world, and their intimate knowledge of it, rather than on the explosive, external symbolic storage that characterizes Homo sapiens culture. They may have had a different type of language, perhaps less syntactically complex, but fully functional for communicating the intricacies of their world. They cared for their sick and injured. The famous old man of La Chapelle had lived for years with a debilitating suite of injuries and arthritis, which would have been impossible without the support of his group. The individual from Shanidar Cave, known as Shanidar I, had a crippling head injury that likely blinded him in one eye, a withered arm and other deformities, yet he lived to a ripe old age, clear evidence of compassion and social cohesion. The dark truth here is that we lost something unique when the distinct Neanderthal culture vanished. We lost a different way of being human, a different perspective on the world. Their consciousness, shaped by hundreds of thousands of years of life in Ice Age Eurasia, was a remarkable product of evolution. In absorbing them, we gained their biological resilience, but their unique cultural and cognitive world, their stories, their beliefs, their songs, all of that is gone forever, leaving only the faintest of echoes in the archaeological record and the silent code within our genes. The story of the Neanderthals does not end 40,000 years ago. It continues today in the biology of nearly everyone reading this narrative. The legacy of that ancient interbreeding is not a static artifact. It is an active and dynamic component of the modern human genome, influencing our health, our appearance, and perhaps even our behavior in subtle but significant ways. Understanding this legacy is key to understanding ourselves, for we are not a pure species, but a mosaic. The most concrete evidence of this legacy lies in the field of medical genetics. As mentioned, Neanderthal DNA has been a mixed blessing. The same immune system, genes, part of the HLA complex, that helped our ancestors survive. Eurasian pathogens are now linked to a hypervigilant immune response that can turn on the body itself, leading to autoimmune diseases. It is a poignant trade-off. The genetic shield they provided against ancient plagues may contribute to modern afflictions like rheumatoid, arthritis, and lupus. Similarly, variants in genes affecting skin and hair that we inherited from them were likely advantageous for managing UV radiation in northern latitudes, but they also correlate with a higher risk of developing certain skin conditions. Our metabolism, shaped by millennia of a hunter-gatherer diet, was also influenced by Neanderthal genes, some of which now predispose us to difficulties in processing modern high-carbohydrate diets, contributing to type 2 diabetes. We are, in a very real sense, living with the consequences of a Paleolithic adaptation in a postmodern world. Beyond physical health, scientists are beginning to explore the possible influences of Neanderthal DNA on our neurology and psychology. Some studies have found correlations between Neanderthal genetic variants and traits such as mood disorders, addiction susceptibility, and even sleep patterns. One fascinating study suggested that people with certain Neanderthal gene variants report a tendency to be night owls. Another found links to feelings of loneliness and isolation. These findings are preliminary, and complex human behavior is influenced by a vast number of genes and environmental factors, but they open up the provocative possibility that some aspects of our modern emotional landscape may be subtly colored by the ancient Neanderthal consciousness within us. Their legacy might not just be in our immune systems, but in the very fabric of our feelings. This genetic inheritance also serves as a powerful reminder of our shared humanity. The concept of race, as it is often simplistically understood, is a modern social construct with shallow biological roots. The deep biological truth is that all non-African humans carry within them the DNA of another, now extinct human species. The differences between modern human populations are trivial when compared to the profound genetic unity we all share, and the even more profound connection we have to our ancient cousins. The Neanderthal within us is a testament to the fact that hybridization and genetic mixing have always been a part of the human story. We are not a species that evolved in pristine isolation. We are a species forged through contact and admixture. The story of the Neanderthals, therefore, is ultimately a story of us. It forces a profound humility. The idea that Homo sapiens is the pinnacle of creation, the inevitable and sole heir to the planet, is a myth. We are one branch of a diverse human family, a branch that, through a combination of luck, adaptability, and perhaps a dose of ruthlessness, ended up being the only one to survive in a distinct form. But we did not achieve this alone, and we did not achieve it by simply being better. We achieved it, in part, by absorbing the strengths of our closest relatives. The dark truth is not a horror story of murder and genocide, though competition and conflict were undoubtedly part of the picture. The true dark truth is the realization of our own hybrid nature, the ghost of a lost people living on inside us. It is the understanding that our victory was not absolute, but a merger. It is the sobering lesson that a different way of being human, a consciousness that had endured for over 300,000 years, could fade away, leaving only a genetic whisper. The Neanderthals are a mirror held up to our own species. They show us our capacity for both violence and compassion, for exclusion and intimacy. They remind us that we are not so unique, and yet, our uniqueness is built upon a foundation that includes them. They are not a separate chapter in the book of human evolution. They are a paragraph woven into the very sentence that describes who we are. And as science continues to read the story written in our bones and our genes, their voice, so long silenced, grows a little louder, reminding us that we have never been alone. The revelation of our Neanderthal ancestry has irrevocably altered our understanding of human history, but it has not closed the book. Instead, it has flung open a door to a much more complex and mysterious past, raising profound new questions and hinting at the shadows of other ghosts in our genetic closet. The story of human evolution is far from a simple, linear progression. It is a tangled bush, with many branches intertwining and merging in ways we are only beginning to comprehend. One of the most pressing unanswered questions is the nature of the social interactions between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. The genetic evidence proves that interbreeding happened, and that the offspring were integrated into human societies. But it does not tell us the story of those encounters. Were they violent? Were they peaceful exchanges? Were they the result of mutual attraction and cooperation, or something more fraught, such as the capture of individuals? The deserts of Neanderthal DNA on the modern X chromosome and in genes related to male fertility suggest that the hybrid males may have been less fertile, pointing to significant biological incompatibilities. This hints that successful interbreeding may have been a challenging process, and the relationships that produced viable offspring were likely exceptions rather than the rule. The social and emotional reality of those encounters, the first meetings between two different kinds of human, is a drama lost to time, but one that continues to captivate the imagination. Furthermore, the Neanderthals were not the only other humans we encountered. As Homo sapiens continued their expansion out of Africa and into East Asia and Oceania, they met another group of ancient humans, the Denisovans, known almost entirely from a few fragmentary bones and a wealth of DNA extracted from a tiny finger bone and a few teeth. Found in a Siberian cave called Denisova, these people are even more enigmatic than the Neanderthals. Genetic analysis reveals they were a distinct sister group to the Neanderthals, diverging from a common ancestor hundreds of thousands of years ago. And just like with the Neanderthals, we interbred with them. Today, indigenous populations in Melanesia, Australia, and the Philippines carry significant amounts of Denisovan DNA, up to 5 to 6% in some cases. The Denisovan story deepens the mystery. It suggests that the world of the Pleistocene was populated by a diversity of human species. We know that Homo floresiensis, the hobbit, lived on the island of Flores in Indonesia until relatively recently. There is genetic evidence in modern Africans of interbreeding with an as-yet-unidentified ghost population of ancient hominins. Everywhere we look, the narrative of a single human species triumphing in isolation crumbles. The truth is that Homo sapiens was a newcomer in a world already teeming with other human forms, and our history is one of repeated interaction and admixture. The extinction of these other lineages was not a single event, but a rolling wave of disappearances that coincided with our expansion. The reasons for this are the subject of intense debate. Were we the cause, through competition or conflict? Or were we simply more resilient to the dramatic climatic fluctuations of the era, and we filled the voids left by other species that succumbed to environmental pressures? This new, complex picture forces us to reconsider the very definition of a species. The biological species concept defines a species as a group of organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Yet, Neanderthals and Denisovans, while morphologically and genetically distinct enough to be classified as separate species, clearly did interbreed with us and with each other. DNA evidence shows a Neanderthal-Denisovan hybrid individual from Denisova Cave. This suggests that the boundaries between these ancient human groups were porous. They were not completely separate biological entities, but rather populations that had been geographically isolated for long periods, developing distinct traits, yet retaining the biological capacity for limited interbreeding when they came into contact. We are not dealing with clearly defined lines, but with shades of grey. The legacy of these other ghosts is also being uncovered. Denisovan DNA, for example, has been found to provide modern Tibetans with a key genetic adaptation for high-altitude survival. The inheritance from these ancient cousins is a gift that keeps on giving, providing adaptive advantages that have been crucial for the peopling of the most extreme environments on Earth. The exploration of this deep, complex ancestry is just beginning. With every new fossil discovered and every new genome sequenced, we peel back another layer, revealing a human story richer, more intertwined, and more humbling than we ever imagined. The story of the Neanderthals, stretching from their evolution hundreds of thousands of years ago to their enduring presence in our DNA today, is more than an academic curiosity. It is a profound narrative with deep implications for how we see ourselves and our place in the world today. The dark truth that has been revealed is not a simple tale of good and evil, of superiority and inferiority. It is a complex lesson in humility, adaptation, and the consequences of contact. First and foremost, the Neanderthal story dismantles the myth of human For centuries, we have placed ourselves on a pedestal, separate from the natural world and its history. The discovery that we are a hybrid species, carrying within us the genetic material of another kind of human, shatters this illusion. We are not a pristine creation. Our genome is a palimpsest, a document written over by the experiences of our ancestors, including their intimate encounters with other human forms. This realization should instill a deep sense of humility. We are not the inevitable, final product of evolution. We are one outcome among many possibilities, the result of a specific set of historical circumstances, chance encounters, and genetic luck. The Neanderthals were, in their own right, a supremely successful and resilient species, adapted to a world that we would find unimaginably harsh. Their distinct lineage endured for over 300,000 years. Homo sapiens, by comparison, has only been around for about 300,000 years, and our modern civilization is a mere blink of an eye. Their longevity is a humbling benchmark. This history also serves as a cautionary tale about the fragility of intelligent life. The Neanderthals were not stupid. They were intelligent, tool-using, compassionate, and culturally adaptive beings. Yet, they disappeared as a distinct people. Their fate illustrates that intelligence and cultural sophistication are no guarantee of long-term survival. The causes of their disappearance were likely a combination of factors: climate change, competition with a closely related species, us, and their own small population size. In a world facing rapid climate change and a biodiversity crisis, their story is a powerful reminder that no species, no matter how capable, is immune to extinction. The forces that shaped their demise are the same forces at play in the world today: environmental pressure and interspecies competition. Their extinction urges us to consider the impact of our own species on the planet and on other forms of life. Finally, the Neanderthal legacy offers a message of unity. The fact that a small group of adventurous Homo sapiens leaving Africa tens of thousands of years ago chose to interact, and even interbreed, with the different humans they encountered speaks to a fundamental human trait: curiosity and the capacity for connection across perceived boundaries. The other was not always annihilated. Sometimes, the other was brought into the family. The genetic differences that are used to construct modern concepts of race are superficial and recent when compared to this deep, shared ancestry that binds all non-Africans to a lost Eurasian people. In a world often divided by tribalism and xenophobia, the Neanderthal within us is a biological testament to the fact that mixing and assimilation have always been a part of who we are. Our strength as a species may lie not in purity, but in our ability to incorporate diversity. The dark truth about our Neanderthal ancestors is ultimately a story of rediscovery. We have rediscovered a lost branch of our family. We have rediscovered a part of ourselves. The Neanderthals are no longer a cautionary tale of failure. They are a mirror. They reflect our own resilience and our own vulnerability. They remind us that we are not alone in history, that our past is shared, and that our future, like theirs, will be written by our ability to adapt, to understand, and to coexist. As we look to the stars and ponder our destiny, we would do well to remember the ghosts that walk within us, for they carry the wisdom of a deep time, a time when we were not the only humans on Earth, and a time whose lessons are more relevant than ever. For the first century after their discovery, our knowledge of Neanderthals came solely from the morphology of their bones, the shape of their skulls, the robustness of their limbs. Paleoanthropologists were like detectives at a crime scene with only the largest pieces of evidence. They could make inferences about how they lived, what they ate, and how they might have behaved, but the intimate details of their lives, and especially their relationship to us, remained shrouded in mystery. And other animals at a site, revolutionizing our ability to know who was where and when. We can analyze proteins in bones, which sometimes survive longer than DNA, to identify the species of a fragmentary fossil. We use advanced 3D scanning and virtual reconstructions to analyze the internal structures of skulls, revealing details of brain development. Each of these tools acts as a key, unlocking a different door to the past. The story of the Neanderthals is no longer told by bones alone, but by a symphony of evidence from genetics, geology, chemistry, and physics. The ability to sequence the genomes of extinct humans raises profound ethical questions that echo from the deep past into the very heart of our modern world. The bones of Neanderthals are not merely scientific specimens, they are the remains of people, of individuals who lived, loved, and suffered. How we treat them, and how we use the knowledge we gain from them, demands careful consideration. The first and most immediate ethical concern is one of respect. Our responsibility is to honor that gift by ensuring that the story we tell about them and about ourselves is one of respect, wonder, and a shared connection to the deep history of our planet.